"You've been too friendly with my husband." Those were the first words out of her mouth as she slammed her coffee mug on the kitchen table, splashing brown liquid across the white lace cloth Mama had stitched years ago. It wasn't a whisper, wasn't a cautious suggestion. It was a sharp accusation cutting the air like a blade. She once called me a snake and left me in the cold. But tonight she's the one begging at my door. "Stay with me until the very end. You won't believe how this story unfolds." For a moment I just stood there, my hand frozen on the back of the chair. My heart didn't even race, it just paused. A lifetime of shared secrets, hand-me-down dresses, and childhood whispers boiled down into one word. She spat at me: snake. I didn't answer right away. That silence was my power. At 65, I'd learned that sometimes quiet unsettles people more than shouting ever could. It was late afternoon, the kind where sunlight slips low and heavy through the blinds, striping the kitchen in uneven lines of gold. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the air, bitter and sharp, and the old clock on the wall ticked too loud, like it wanted to witness every second of our unraveling. Her husband sat at the end of the table, stiff as a fence post. He didn't defend me. He didn't defend himself either. He just stared at his hands, knuckles white, jaw set. Guilt has a way of showing itself even when a man says nothing. I noticed it. She noticed it. And that silence between us all said more than any words could. "I opened my home to you," she hissed, her voice shaking, though whether from rage or fear I couldn't tell. "And this is how you repay me?" Acting too close to my husband, smiling at him, laughing with him like what? I finally said, calm, my voice steady enough to make her flinch. "Like a sister-in-law? Like family?" But she didn't hear reason. Betrayal had already settled into her bones. Or maybe it was jealousy. That's the thing with family. Sometimes the line between love and envy blurs until you can't tell one from the other. I wanted to laugh, not out of humor but out of the absurdity of it all. Me, widowed, tired, still smelling of the detergent from the laundry job I'd just come from, accused of tempting her man. My shoes were scuffed, my hands calloused. No perfume, no painted lips, nothing of the kind she imagined. But I didn't laugh. I just breathed slow, held myself still. Because I knew something she didn't. Something I wouldn't say aloud. Not yet. The kitchen window was cracked and a breeze slipped in, carrying the faint smell of cut grass from the neighbor's yard. A dog barked down the street. Life outside carried on normal while inside my bloodline was breaking apart word by word. "You need to pack your things," she said finally, her voice cold now, settled, like she'd convinced herself of her own lie. "I won't have you under my roof another night." The words hit, but they didn't knock me down. I'd been through worse storms. I'd buried a husband. I'd raised children who'd grown and gone. I knew how to survive being unwanted. Still something inside me twisted. Not from fear but from recognition. This was no heat-of-the-moment outburst. She'd been building this story in her head, brick by brick, waiting for the day she could hurl it at me. And there it was, her chance to cast me as the villain while she played the wounded wife. Her husband finally cleared his throat. "Maybe we should." But she cut him off with a glare so sharp it silenced him. He dropped his gaze again. That silence of his was louder than her shouting. I pulled out the chair, sat down across from her, and folded my hands neatly on the table. My calmness rattled her. I saw it in the way her eyes darted, unsure, like she'd expected me to cry or beg. Instead, I leaned slightly forward and said, "If you believe that, then you've already lost more than you think." Her brows pinched together. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't explain. Let her wonder. A woman's strength isn't always in the proof she shows but in the secrets she holds close. And I held mine like a knife behind my back, hidden, waiting. The kitchen felt smaller by the minute, the walls pressing in with the weight of her suspicion. I thought of Mama, how she used to say, "Jealousy rots quicker than fruit left in the sun." And here it was, rotting our bloodline right in front of me. She stood, crossed her arms, and said louder, "I won't have a snake in my home. Not under my roof. Not near my husband." Snake. The word hissed in my ears. My sister. The girl I once held hands with walking to school, the one I shared a bed with during winter nights when we couldn't afford more blankets, now saw me as poison. My chest ached, not from her words, but from the memory of what we used to be. She was 2 years younger but always louder, always certain she was right. And I had always let her believe it. But not this time. This time I wouldn't bend. "I'll leave," I said finally, my voice calm, almost too calm. But remember this moment because one day it will return to you. Her eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? I gave her a small smile. It's a promise. Her husband shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, his collar damp with sweat. He didn't defend me, but he didn't defend her either. He sat caught in the middle, and that told me more than any words could. She grabbed the handle of the coffee pot, poured herself another cup though her hand trembled, and muttered, "Get out before I regret letting you stay this long." I rose slowly, steady, my knees aching from long hours of work but my back straight. I wasn't leaving like a beggar. I was leaving like a woman who knew her worth. At the doorway I turned once more. She stood in the kitchen, arms wrapped tight around herself as if she needed to hold herself together. Her husband still sat frozen, staring at the table. The sunlight through the blinds painted them in broken stripes, like a prison of their own making. And right then I felt it, not anger, not sorrow, but something sharper. The first spark of revenge, quiet and certain. I let the door creak as I opened it, the sound long and slow, dragging out her unease. Then I looked over my shoulder, met her eyes, and said in a low, steady voice, "Blood should never betray blood. But you just did. And I never forget." I stepped out, leaving the door wide open behind me, letting the hot summer air rush in, carrying with it the weight of what had just been broken. And that's where I left her, standing in her own kitchen, watching me go, unaware of how the tables would turn. I stepped out of her door, the hot summer air pressing heavy against my skin, and for the first time in my life I had nowhere to go. The street was quiet except for the distant hum of cicadas, their steady song reminding me that night would come soon, and with it the question of where I would lay my head. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I walked. My shoes scraped the cracked pavement as I carried myself block after block, away from her house, away from the smell of burnt coffee, away from the accusation that still rang in my ears like a bell I couldn't unhear. I thought I'd feel broken. Instead I felt hollow, like someone had scooped everything out of me and left only the shell. But somewhere deep inside, past the ache in my feet and the tremble in my hands, there was a spark. A quiet one but steady. I ended up at a rundown boarding house on the edge of town. The paint peeled from the siding and the porch steps groaned under my weight as I climbed them. The landlady, Mrs. Hall, looked me up and down through the screen door before finally letting me in. "Cash only," she said. I nodded and pulled out the small bills I had tucked in my purse. My savings weren't much. Scraps from washing other people's clothes, coins from long shifts standing on aching legs. But it was enough for a week's rent in a room that smelled faintly of mildew and loneliness. That first night I sat on the thin mattress, listening to the walls creak and the pipes groan, and I told myself, this is temporary. This is where I begin again. The nights were the hardest. I could handle the days. Work kept my hands busy and my mind half distracted. But when the sun slipped down and the town fell quiet, the emptiness of the room wrapped around me like a cold blanket. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and hear every sound magnified. The drip of the faucet in the bathroom, the shuffle of rats in the walls, the faraway whistle of a train cutting across the night. And yet those nights became my fire. Every ache in my back reminded me of the betrayal that pushed me here. Every empty corner of that room was proof of what she'd done. I let it burn inside me, not to destroy me but to forge me stronger. At work, the women asked questions. "Why aren't you staying with your sister anymore?" one of them finally asked as we folded sheets at the laundry. Her name was Nora, a kind woman with gray hair tied in a bun so tight it pulled at her temples. I paused, hands buried in warm cotton, and answered with the only thing I was willing to share. Sometimes blood doesn't mean loyalty. She gave me a look, part pity, part curiosity, but she didn't press further. Word spreads in small towns, though. I knew whispers followed me just as they followed my sister. Some believed her story. Some didn't. But I learned quick. People will always choose the juicier version, not the truer one. So I kept my head down. Let them whisper. One evening, walking back from work, I saw him, her husband, across the street near the hardware store. He spotted me too. For a second his eyes flicked up, met mine, and then darted away. He adjusted his collar, shifted his feet, and disappeared inside the store like a guilty boy caught sneaking candy. That told me everything. His silence that day in the kitchen hadn't been loyalty to her. It had been shame. I tucked that little truth away like a secret coin in my pocket. I didn't need to confront him. Not yet. Sometimes silence is the loudest weapon. The night stretched into weeks. I made a ritual of it, sitting by the small window of my room sipping weak tea and watching the world outside. The street lamp buzzed with moths, the shadows of passing cars flickered across the walls, and I thought about Mama and Papa, both gone now, and what they would say if they saw how their daughters had turned against each other. I thought about all the times I had covered for my sister growing up, how I lied for her when she snuck out, how I gave her my coat in the winter, how I took the blame when she broke Mama's vase. I thought about how easily she had erased all of that with one accusation. And I made myself a promise. I would never forget this feeling. Not the loneliness. Not the hunger in my belly some nights when money ran too thin. Not the ache in my chest when I walked past families who laughed together while mine crumbled. Every ache was fuel. Every silence was fire. Mrs. Hall, the landlady, noticed I was never late on rent. "You work too hard for a woman your age," she said one evening as she collected the bills from my hand. I gave her a small smile. "Work keeps me steady." She shrugged, stuffed the bills in her apron and muttered, "Steady or not, don't let them walk over you. Folks will if you let them." Her words stuck. Because wasn't that the truth? My sister had walked right over me, thinking she could accuse me, throw me out, and I'd just vanish quietly. But I hadn't vanished. I was still here. Still standing. Still burning. One night, thunder rolled in heavy from the west. Rain hammered the thin roof of the boarding house, dripping through cracks and pooling on the floor in little puddles. I set out bowls to catch the leaks, and as I did I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of storms, not of whispers, not of being alone. I realized, what she thought would break me had become the very thing sharpening me. And in that storm, with water dripping into bowls and the thunder rattling the glass, I whispered out loud to myself, "One day she'll come to me. And when she does, I'll remember this." I didn't know when that day would come. Didn't know how. But I believed it deep in my bones. In the meantime I saved. I pinched pennies, skipped small luxuries, and tucked away money like a squirrel hiding acorns. Not because I needed much, but because independence tasted sweeter when I knew it was mine alone. The room was still lonely. The nights were still long. But little by little, I began to see myself not as the woman who had been thrown out, but as the woman who had survived it. And survival, I realized, is the first step toward revenge. One Sunday as I walked past the church on Main Street, I caught a glimpse of her through the open doors. She sat in the front pew, her shoulders hunched, her head bowed low. People were watching her, whispering, the way small-town folks always do when they smell scandal. For a brief moment our eyes met across that crowded room. Her lips pressed thin, her eyes sharp, but behind them, just for a flicker, I saw worry. It was enough. Enough to know that the story wasn't finished. That her pride was cracking piece by piece. I kept walking. Didn't stop, didn't greet her, didn't acknowledge the tie of blood between us. Let her wonder why. Let her stew. Because for me, the nights I spent alone had already rewritten who I was. I wasn't her victim anymore. I was her shadow. Waiting. And every night as I lay in that narrow bed, I carried the same thought into sleep. When the tables turn, and they will, she'll find me stronger than she ever imagined. The knock came late, long after the sun had dropped behind the rooftops, leaving only the buzzing street lamp outside my window for company. I had just poured myself a cup of tea, the kind of quiet comfort I'd grown used to in my evenings alone. At first I thought it might be a neighbor, maybe Mrs. Collins from upstairs asking to borrow sugar again. But when I opened the door, it wasn't sugar she wanted. It was my sister. Her eyes told the story before her lips even tried. Dark rings sat heavy underneath, her gaze hollow and distant, like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. Behind her clung two small children, their clothes wrinkled, faces smudged, and little hands gripping her coat like it was the only thing keeping them upright. "Please," she whispered, her voice so thin it nearly disappeared into the night air. "We've got nowhere else." My heart clenched, but it wasn't the kind of ache that makes you rush forward and embrace someone. No, this ache was sharper. A memory of her voice calling me a snake in my own bloodline still rang in my ears. The night she tossed me out, humiliated me, and chose her husband's whispers over my truth. Now here she stood, the same lips that once spit venom begging for mercy. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, heavy as a curtain. I studied her face, the way her jaw trembled, the way her shoulders curled inward like she wanted to fold herself into nothing. And behind her those children, innocent, fragile, blinking up at me with wide, confused eyes. Why here? I finally asked, my tone calm, measured. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the distance she had put between us. Because you're all I have left, she murmured. The words were bitter on my ears. All she had left? I thought of the nights I'd spent alone after she shut me out, the whispers behind my back in family circles, the way even neighbors looked at me differently after her accusations. I had nothing then, and no one came knocking on my door. She shifted her weight, pulling her coat tighter around her. The kids haven't eaten a proper meal in 2 days. Please, just tonight. Her voice cracked on that last word. I stepped aside, but not in the way she hoped. I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, and let her stand there shivering. Funny, I said quietly. When I needed a roof, you couldn't even spare me one night. Her eyes flickered, shame sparking and then dying just as quickly. She glanced down at her children, then back at me. I was wrong, she admitted. The words were rushed, forced, as if the act of saying them burned her tongue. I see that now. But please don't make them pay for my mistakes. The youngest child, a boy maybe 5 or 6, tugged at her sleeve. Mommy, I'm cold, he whispered. That tore at me in a way her pleas never could. I felt the warmth of my apartment at my back and the chill of the hallway on my face. 2 worlds separated by one wooden door. My mind raced. Part of me wanted to reach for them, to pull them inside, but another part remembered the sting of betrayal too vividly to let it fade. I'll get them something warm, I said, my tone clipped. Wait here. I closed the door on her face, though not fully. I left it cracked just enough so I could hear her shallow breaths, the quiet whimper of a child leaning against her leg. In the kitchen I pulled out what I could: bread, peanut butter, 2 apples. Simple but more than nothing. I wrapped it neatly in a bag and returned. When I handed it to her, she didn't take it right away. Her lips trembled, eyes glassy, as though she wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. Finally, she reached out, her fingers brushing mine for the briefest moment. It was a touch that used to mean sisterhood. Now it only reminded me of everything broken between us. Thank you, she whispered. I shook my head. Don't thank me. Feed your children. The boy grabbed the apple first, biting into it with such desperation that juice ran down his chin. His sister followed, chewing silently, eyes darting up at me between bites. Watching them eat hurt more than I expected. Hunger in a child is a cruel sight. But even as my chest tightened, I held my ground. You can't stay here, I said firmly. Her head snapped up, panic flooding her expression. What? Where are we supposed to go? The shelters are full. Not here, I cut in. My voice didn't rise, but the steel in it was enough to end her protest. You chose your path the night you threw me out. Don't come to me now because the ground beneath you crumbled. Her lips parted as if to argue, but nothing came. Only silence, broken by the crunch of her children finishing their meager meal. She looked smaller then, shrunken, as if the weight of her choices pressed down on her bones. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The air between us carried years of unspoken pain, betrayal, and longing for a bond that once was but could never be again. Finally she pulled her coat tighter and nodded. Not at me but at the floor, as though she couldn't bear to meet my eyes. She took her children's hands and turned toward the stairwell. As they descended, their footsteps echoing into the hollow night, I stood there frozen. A part of me wanted to call out, to run after them. But another part, the part that had been burned and scarred by her betrayal, stayed rooted to the spot. I closed the door softly, almost tenderly, as if sealing off a wound. My apartment felt colder than before, though the heater hummed steadily. I sat at my table, tea now lukewarm, staring at the cup as though it might hold answers. What did I gain by turning her away? Strength, perhaps. Dignity. Control over my own life. But at what cost? The image of those hollow eyes and hungry children lingered, haunting the corners of my quiet home. And yet, somewhere deep down, a small voice reminded me, this wasn't the end of the story. I sat at that table long after the sound of their footsteps disappeared into the stairwell. The heater hummed steadily, the lamp flickered against the pale wall, but all I could hear was the echo of children's shoes on concrete. My hand rested on the teacup, now stone cold. I didn't drink. I didn't move. My silence filled the room like smoke, curling and choking every thought. And in that silence I realized something. I didn't have to lift a hand, raise my voice. or chase her down the hallway to prove anything anymore. My stillness, my refusal was enough. For the first time in years, the power was mine, not in anger, not in shouting, but in the choice to simply let her go without a word. But power has a way of feeling heavy. The next morning, I found her scarf lying on the stoop. It must have slipped off in her hurry. I picked it up, stiff with the smell of stale perfume and cold air. My instinct was to run it down to her, wherever she'd ended up. But instead I folded it neatly and placed it in the back of my drawer. A reminder. A marker. Proof that I could hold on to something without giving it back. Later that day I walked to the corner store. People nodded, said their hellos just like always. But I noticed the way some of them lingered with their eyes. Word had already started to spread. It always did in this town. Someone must have seen her at my door with those children. Now they were wondering, did I take her in? Did I forgive her? Or did I turn her away? I didn't answer their silent questions. My lips stayed sealed, my smile faint. That was my shield. My silence was saying more than gossip ever could. That night I heard a knock again. Not at my door but faintly from the floor below. Curious, I leaned out my window. There she was, standing in the alley, speaking to the landlord. Her children clung to her legs, tired and restless. She gestured with her hands, pleading. The landlord shook his head firm, then pointed down the street. They moved on. I closed my curtain without a word. The days stretched like that. Each evening I caught glimpses of her. At the church steps, waiting in line for a hot meal. By the bus stop, her children sitting on the curb while she made desperate phone calls. She never came back to my door and I never sought her out. And still the silence between us grew louder than any shouting match we'd ever had. It wasn't easy though. The guilt gnawed at me when I lay awake. I'd see their small faces, tired and hollow, and wonder if my choice was too cruel. But then I'd remember her words, snake in my own bloodline, and the way she'd slammed her door in my face when I had nothing. That memory burned like iron, keeping me steady. One evening I met Mrs. Collins in the hallway. She leaned close, lowering her voice like she was passing along a secret. "Your sister's been asking around for help," she said. "She even came to me. I told her no. After the way she treated you? She's got a nerve." I nodded, pretending calm. But inside a storm brewed. My sister had once turned everyone against me, and now those same people turned their backs on her. It should have felt like justice, but instead, it felt like carrying a weight I hadn't asked for. So I kept my lips sealed. One Saturday I saw her again, this time at the laundromat. She didn't notice me at first. She was scrubbing a shirt in the sink, her children sitting quietly on the bench, their small feet swinging. She looked thinner, her cheeks hollowed, her hair pulled back carelessly. For a moment I wanted to walk up, to press a few coins into her hand, to let the old bond slip through the cracks of my resolve. But I didn't. Instead I stood in the doorway, invisible, and let the sight carve itself into my memory. Then I walked away without her ever knowing I had been there. That was when I understood. Silence wasn't just refusal. It was survival. It was drawing a line so deep in the sand that no storm could erase it. By not speaking, by not interfering, I was giving her back everything she had once handed me. Abandonment, coldness, the hard truth of standing alone. And yet silence had another side. One night there was another knock. This time it was the landlord at my door. He rubbed his neck, shifting uncomfortably. "She came asking again," he muttered. "Said she thought you'd talk to me for her. I told her you hadn't said a word." He paused, searching my face. "You're really not going to step in, are you?" I met his gaze squarely. "No." He nodded once, then left. I closed the door slowly, pressing my back against it. The truth was, my silence was working its way through the whole building. People stopped asking about her. They stopped offering her help. The less I said, the less anyone else felt they needed to. Without realizing it, I had turned my silence into a kind of weapon, one that spread farther than my own four walls. And yet each time I lay in bed I wondered how long I could carry it. Silence might be sharp, but it cuts both ways. The edges pressed against me too, reminding me of the sister I had loved once, of the family we had shared before betrayal made strangers of us. I thought of her children most of all. Their wide eyes, their small hands clinging to her coat. They were paying for sins that weren't theirs. And still I stayed quiet. Weeks passed. Winter deepened. I saw less of her in the alley, less of her in the church line. Rumors swirled. Some said she found a room on the edge of town. Others claimed she left altogether. I didn't ask. I didn't confirm. I kept my silence, letting it hang like frost on every word I never spoke. The silence became my armor. It was how I held myself steady in a world that had tried to shatter me. It was how I reclaimed my dignity piece by piece. But deep inside I knew silence can't last forever. Eventually it cracks. Eventually someone speaks. And when that moment came I would be ready. Eventually silence cracks. And for me, it happened on an evening when the wind howled so fiercely through the alley that my window panes rattled in their frames. I had just settled into my chair with a quilt around my shoulders when another knock came. This one was different. Slow. Weak. When I opened the door my sister stood there again. Not proud, not defiant, but worn down to almost nothing. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips pale, and the children at her sides looked smaller than the last time I saw them, as if hunger itself had carved them thinner. She didn't speak right away. Instead she looked at me with eyes so empty they no longer held shame or pride. "'Tis neat." And then she said the words I never thought I'd hear. "I was wrong. About you. About everything." Her voice broke on the last syllable. The children clung tighter, their little faces peeking up at me, waiting. My silence, the same silence that had been my shield, my weapon, my revenge, rose up between us again. I could feel it pressing at my throat, begging me not to answer. For weeks I had wielded it like a blade, cutting her out of my world. And it had worked. She had felt its sting. But standing there, her words hanging in the cold air, I realized the silence had cut me too. I stepped aside without speaking, and for the first time since this began, she walked into my apartment. The room felt different immediately, crowded, tense. She sank into the chair across from me, the children curling into her lap. I handed them bread without a word. They devoured it, crumbs scattering across the quilt. My sister's eyes filled with tears at the sight. "I thought he'd take care of us," she whispered. Her hands shook as she smoothed the children's hair. "I believed his lies. I chose him over you and he left us with nothing." It was the first time she had said it aloud. "The truth." I leaned back, my hands wrapped around the warm teacup. "And when I came to you, when I begged for a roof just one night." Her tears spilled over. "I was cruel. I see that now. I thought pushing you away made me stronger, that siding with him meant security. But all it did was burn the only bridge I ever truly needed." Her words didn't heal the past. Nothing could. But hearing them spoken plain and raw was the twist I had been waiting for all along. Not an apology mumbled in desperation. Not excuses. The truth. The silence between us shifted. It wasn't sharp anymore. It wasn't a blade. It softened, bending like a branch under the weight of snow. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added quickly. "Not after everything I did. I need you to know I finally see it. What I did. Who I hurt." The children finished eating and curled against her, their small breaths steady. My sister sat there, shoulders slumped, eyes red. And for the first time in years she looked younger, not in her face but in her defeat. Like the girl I once knew, stripped of all the arrogance that had hardened her. I didn't rush to speak. Instead I let the moment breathe. I wanted her to sit in it, to feel the weight of her own words. And then when the silence had stretched just enough I finally answered. "You broke me once," I said quietly. "And I swore I'd never let you do it again. That's why I stayed silent. That was my revenge, letting you taste what you once served me." She nodded slowly as though the truth pierced but didn't surprise her. "But here's the thing," I continued, my voice steady. "Revenge only carries a body so far. After a while it eats at the one holding it. And I'm tired of being eaten alive." Her head snapped up, startled. "I'm not offering you forgiveness," I said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm done letting bitterness keep me awake at night. That ends now." For a long moment she just stared at me. Then her shoulders sagged and a shuddering breath left her body. It was as if she had been bracing for a final strike, and instead I'd laid the blade down. We sat there together in that small apartment, not reconciled, not whole, but changed. Later, after they left with full stomachs and warmer coats I dug from my closet, I lay down in my bed. The heater hummed as always, the night outside howled, but inside me something quieted. For the first time since she called me a snake in my own bloodline, I closed my eyes without anger gnawing at me. I didn't dream of her betrayal. I didn't replay her cruelty. Instead I slept. And that sleep, deep, unbroken, free of bitterness, was the sweetest revenge I ever could have taken. If this story shook you the way it shook me, don't walk away in silence. Subscribe now, and join me for more dark, emotional stories of betrayal, revenge, and survival.